Well, welcome back to the next episode of The Fifth Seat. Today we do have some very interesting topics. You might want to have a seatbelt on for this one. I have a feeling it's going to be a wild ride. And with that being said, do you want to introduce topic number one here today?
Absolutely. So the topic we're discussing right now is talking about emasculation.
Okay, bye.
As we, at least I feel that men in society are being systematically emasculated. I feel there's an agenda behind it. There's multiple agendas behind it. We can say one is tyrannical, that any society that has a weak male or a mass amounts of weak men will get taken over. Even in the animal kingdom, the male is the leader, gorillas, sharks, whatever. That's just kind of the way it goes. So as we see in our society, this kind of agenda to feminize men, it's creating a lot of chaos, and I think it violates our nature as humans in a little bit. What do you guys think?
Not a little bit, a lot bit. I could only imagine if my husband was any less of a man and any more of a woman, I guess, so to speak. I'm married to a hockey-playing guy who, loves to hunt or fish or, whatever the typical male hobbies are. And I couldn't imagine any other way. But in general, we have, it goes to a topic I think we started to cover in a previous episode where we're talking about the whole structure of the family as well, and how government's trying to seep in and trying to change how we view family structure and how we're going to, try to rely on each other in different ways instead of a typical family unit. And so I think there's a lot to that, but
in our society, it's kind of like it's being marketed that gender roles is a prison. Gender roles are not a prison, it's a framework for how we should function. And the way men and women operate are different, even as children. Women operate in one way, women are nurturers. So we tapped into our emotion a little more. And I don't like to use the word emotional because it has a negative connotation. It gives the impression of irrational. And that's not what I'm saying. Where men tend to lean a little bit more to logic and direction a little more. And I feel that men and women complement each other very well, because sometimes when if a woman is being too hyper emotional and lacking focus, a man can kind of help reel that in. Whereas if a man is like too linear and ignoring everything that's happening on the parameters, you can crash because you're ignoring everything on the sides. So I feel like our society is trying to blow up the gender roles and create this new system that we've never seen in society. And I feel like it's a big experiment and it's not working out. I feel like our families are totally dysfunctional. If you talk to most single people, they seem very miserable, because it's just, not everybody, of course. I'm not speaking in absolutes. I'm not speaking in absolutes. But I'm just saying in a general sense, because I feel like a lot of people I'm 35, and I know a lot of people are complaining that they can't find suitable mates because it's just such dysfunction. And no matter who I talk to, where they're from, I'm hearing the same thing. So it's definitely something social happening that we need to address.
I'd be curious though, before you made your comment, you shook your head. No.
I mean, that's lots of nonsense. I think up here it's like crazy world 2.0. I mean, okay, so if men are in a position where they have had their legs cut out from under them, why do we have, businesses run by men in such high percentages? Why do we look at our legislature and our local government and it's so heavily male? Where do you see the sign of men cowering in the corner? I see men in leadership roles and in competent positions and in positions of great power all the time.
See, it
depends on the context you're talking about. You're talking about in a business and legislative. I'm talking about in a relational role.
Yeah,
so
why
is that your business? Whether somebody wants to...
It's not about me trying to control, but I'm saying is the messaging that's being put forth that masculinity is toxic. Why do we even use the word toxic masculinity? A perfect example of the idea that masculinity is toxic, I know it's going to sound crazy, however, female pedophiles. Notice how a male will engage in an inappropriate sexual relationship with a minor, he'll get 25 years. A woman will do it, cry, and get probation. So it's the idea that men are more toxic and aggressive. And we don't even have a word toxic femininity. That's not even in our national conversation. So the context I'm talking about in the context of relational and in the human family, not in the context of business and legislation. That's not the context.
Okay, so I'm curious, what was the second shaking of the head about?
There is a lot of, toxic femininity is called being a feminazi. That's the term that they use preferably to talk about excessive control of women. So it's not parallel. That's why you don't hear the phrase toxic femininity. But getting back to this idea of the family and about individual liberties, why would you care whether people are having a relationship in which they are negotiating themselves, the roles and the things that they want to do? Why would that be of concern to me as a neighbor? Or
I don't think that's exactly what she's getting at. I think it's the concept of creating, of culture turning and trying to create the expectations for males as they grow up collectively. Not that they're not going to be in positions of leadership like you're talking about or things like that, but just in overall the expectations of what males are allowed to look like in their relationships. And equating some male tendencies that might sound more like leadership or aggression or whatever, all of a sudden that equates to dangerous or excessive or violent, and those are not the same thing.
So you say that there's a kind of re-scripting. Where do you see that from? Like where is
Academia.
Hold on a second. As the only
Academia.
male here, I'd like to jump into this conversation
Please do.
about men. Okay,
Please do.
Thank you. But before I get to that, I would like to hear everyone's perspective. So Judy, please share what you have to say about
Male-female
about
relationship.
yes, the topic at hand.
Well, like I said, I'm the mature woman here, and when I was first married, I wasn't working, and so I was home with kids right away, and I got an allowance. I had asked for money. I didn't like that at all, and so after I had my kids raised, I went to work so I could have my own money.
Right.
So back to that money thing you were talking about.
right.
But I also taught school at a school that had all boys and all girls, and I taught both classes. And all boys together are just, they're black and white. They do everything because there's a consequence that is physical. They're just physical people. Girls are so complex, and they're devious and tricky and so on. So what you're talking about, the male and the female, yeah, it balances out if you have a good communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think it's just like any of us in the public square. You know what I'm saying? People advocate for their beliefs in the public square. So I don't think it's any different. A lot of these people, they want to restructure. When I say a lot of these people, I don't want to use just the ominous they. I want to be very specific. I'm just like speaking in academia. The way our society is set up, academia in a lot of ways set the rules. Because politicians or people in society, the experts say, experts say. So
Speaking
these
of
are the experts
politicians,
that-
though, we do have one sitting right here. So
I would just like to point out that I think that there is more than enough social equity going on in this conversation alone. As a matter of fact, if anything, then I should probably get more opportunity to speak.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the perspectives here, I think, are great because it represents, we've got a number of different perspectives, right? So
You got strong women.
very strong women. Yes. Okay, let's not underestimate that. All right.
I hope they zoomed in on your facial expression when you said that one.
Yes, very strong women. So, all right, so we've got the perspective of women wanting more equity in society, which is valid, right? And then we've got the perspective of women wanting men to be able to continue doing what they have been able to do, which is provide for the family, which is also valid. I'd like to make the point that both of those arguments, it relates back to, again, money, which is my wheelhouse, as you know, and that since 1973, we've had a 98% decline in the value of our dollar. So what that means is, to put it in concepts that everyone can understand, wages are 50 or 30% lower today for the average individual than they would have been had we not separated off the gold standard. That breaking off the gold standard in which the dollar can now be printed into anything and we lose value, which $2 trillion was just pumped into the economy. We all got a 20% pay cut overnight because of that. Now it's difficult to bring that back into what that does for the family, but as people who've all been in relationships here, money happens to be at the center of a lot of the problems, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So if we really want to solve the underlying problem that leads to so much of so many of these other problems, it comes back to money and who owns it. So, and I guess that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make, and I agree with Agreed. Women deserve more equity in society. They deserve the ability to live their life how they want. And men also deserve that same thing. And we don't want to go from one end of the pendulum and swing all the way over to the other. What we really want to do is find a good equal middle. It would be nice if we could do that from a political standpoint too, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of my point. I just, that's the thing, like the whole feminist movement, it's not like these women were totally ridiculous. You know what I'm saying? I just feel that we're doing what you're saying. We're going from one end to the total extreme opposite, and it's just, that's not the answer. So that was kind of where I was getting
How can we
into.
bring women's rights into the picture without making men have to like
Exactly. That's-
dial it down and not be more of who they are?
You were gonna say something, Julie?
Yeah, I was going to say something. My children now are in the same age group as some of you, and they raise their kids so differently. Dad takes care of the kids this day and mom the next day. They get up in the middle of the night when they have to go to work tomorrow. That never happened with me. It was the mom's job to do all of that because you didn't go to work. And so it's different now, and there's a lot more sharing. And I don't think, from my perspective, the men feel bad about it. I think they feel like they're getting a little more involved in their kids, in the lives. So
I think that
Wait, they're supposed to be sharing?
sharing
Is my
is
husband
caring.
here?
yeah,
Right?
sharing.
is
I'm sure
caring.
he changed diapers.
Sure. I mean, it's about choice, right? It's about choice. I mean, sharing is caring.
Yes.
But we also should have the choice if we should be able to live on a single income. What if you're not married, right?
You make that choice because you've got boats and you've got motorcycles and you've got
In theory,
vacations.
but the reality, the economic numbers do not support that. Because of the wages, because the Federal Reserve likes to print money, and because the wages have not kept up with productivity, we have the family unit has to. I mean, we have to have two incomes in the family,
yeah.
right? And that
Well,
makes
to
it-
have
To
kids.
live the way you want to.
To have kids, but
To
if
have
you're a
kids.
single individual, you can fare far greater with one income than you try to when you have two people that have one kid or two people that have two kids.
Right,
and
but if you're a man and you want to be able to provide for the family, right? Then and you're thinking, well, I'm making enough to support me, but not enough for the entire family.
So you don't
Then
have kids.
you may not have kids.
Yeah.
Right. So
I've
that
seen
contributes back into the demasculation of society.
I want to make a quick point to Joe's point about the forcing of two incomes. I agree with you on that because it's causing a lot of problems. Because I know this is going to sound far-fetched, but follow me here, and I think you guys will agree. I feel like the fact that women have to go to work, I think that is a problem because I'm a mom
Yeah.
and carrying children
true.
is
It is,
very
okay.
taxing
We
on
have-
your
we have
body.
agreement.
And I know many women who, after having children, they're like, I do not want to go back to work. I want to be with my child, but they can't.
Right.
And so a lot of the work, or not the work, a lot of the work nurturing that the mother would traditionally have for her child, she has to outsource it to somebody else.
Right.
In addition to the
And
fact,
that
I think
raises
it's causing
costs,
poor
right?
health. The number one killer of women is heart disease. In addition to the fact, before women had the time to cook a nutritious meal for her family, now she doesn't.
Right.
Now it's fast food.
Right.
Now it's McDonald's and,
Right.
and all kind of stuff. So it's causing a ripple effect in
Yes.
society.
But okay, so let's get back to causes.
Yeah.
You're saying that has to do with the economy,
And
and you're saying it's
more than
radical
the economy.
feminists.
It's not. The economy is representative of all the interactions and the purchases and that sort of thing. What I'm saying is it's more than the economy. It's the actual money itself. It's the money.
Right, the gold
The
standard.
money
was,
that is produced
right.
by the Federal Reserve.
What does that look like? I'm a teacher.
I know, right?
Get closer.
I do a lot of pro bono work,
There you
so
go.
I was.
Yeah, you get some money. You get some money. Everybody gets money.
Joe
His
says
name
no.
is
Right.
Alexander
So look,
Hamilton.
No, seriously, let's take it. Now, everyone has a bill in their hands. At the very top of the dollar, it says Federal Reserve Note,
It says,
right? The word
It
note,
says, "You
the word
don't
note
have-
means
you don't
debt.
own this."
It means promissory note, yeah.
Yeah.
Means debt, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
that means that every time, just recently, the $2 trillion that Congress borrowed or printed, right? They borrowed it from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve printed it out of nowhere. They gave it to the government, and it was added to our debt. And because there's more money in society now, that means everybody's earning 20% less.
True.
Right? That 20% less money or money that we get to keep because there's so much more means that we have the individual incomes have gone down. It means that you have to pay for childcare because individuals no longer can afford it on their own. It means that because you're going to work, now all of a sudden you have to get fast food, which means that healthcare costs go
Right.
up.
Yeah.
Because now we're gaining
you're
weight
bringing
because
dinner
we're
home in a
buying fast
bag.
food.
And you got to have a nice
So I-
car, and you got to to
Okay,
get
so-
there and clothes to
And
wear.
all of that stuff is more expensive because there's more money circulating in the economy. So that means that Ford and GM need to raise their price
Yes.
in order to pay for the inputs into
yeah.
the car.
Yeah. and then
So I'm
you get-
curious now, because you've been able to tie money into all these problems we've been talking about. So we've just talked about basically the gender issues. What about race and color and those kinds of things? Is there, what's going on with that? Is there a topic you think we should talk about there? And I'm curious to see how you're going to tie money into that one.
I am going to tie money into this one. You're absolutely right.
big topic.
Are we transitioning to topic number 2?
I think we
Okay.
should, yeah.
All right. So topic number 2 is the colorless society, supposedly. Right now, if I were a colorless society, I'd be wearing all gray here. Right? I don't think that there's any such thing as a colorless society, and we shouldn't be going for a colorless society because, to me, that's what that's the effect of what
I agree.
communism is all about. Right? We're not all the same.
Right.
We're supposed to be treated equally under the law. Right? We have different skin colors and different hair colors and different perspectives and different attitudes, and those should be embraced, not pushed away and fought away. Now, to your point though, about some of the racial equity issues, we do have a big problem with that. Me being a white male, I have on average the people that I represent are 10 times wealthier than my black counterparts. And that leads into all sorts of problems. It's going to lead to crime. It's going to lead to the breakdown of the family structure, right? And the breakdown of the family unit is what leads to more government needing to be involved in our lives.
Are you saying that being poor means that your family breaks down?
I'm saying it definitely
It's a
contributes to
definite
it. I mean,
strain
does
on that.
money not cause
Absolutely.
divorce?
So, sorry, I couldn't hear both of you at the same time. What is it that you said?
I said absolutely.
Yes.
It's a big strain.
As a divorced person, I would like to chime in on that.
I've been divorced too.
As a divorced
By the way,
person,
the dollars that I gave out are not charity. I want them back. If we're done with this, right?
as a divorced person, I could say it just depends. I don't think money is leading to a lot of divorces, and unfortunately, a vast majority of my peers are divorced, and money was not the issue.
Right, it
It was
wasn't
the
for
men
me
and
either.
women unable. It was a lot of infidelity. It was people's personalities. There's a lot of other issues.
Roles
I
of
do
the-
agree money is a problem. I'm not going to negate that,
Right.
but I think it's the inability to work together. Kind of even ties into the
Communicate.
first topic. It's
Communication.
like everybody is transactional. What do I get out of the deal instead of what can I offer another person? So if you have two people who's saying what can I offer another person, then it's going to be healthy. But if it's what do you give me, then
I think it's
dysfunction.
misunderstanding too. I mean, I got a lot of experience with this. Misunderstandings. So the communication is just so, and we're not taught that. I didn't teach my children that. I'm learning at a later age that that's very important. So,
But to the okay.
That's conflict resolution, right? So,
Which is one of my
Yes.
areas of expertise.
And
as
just
a-
respect. I think it's respect.
okay.
You respect the other person's
Sure.
belief enough to let them say something.
Absolutely. That makes sense.
recognize that everybody has their own viewpoint.
Yes.
Everybody has their own viewpoint.
Yes.
I was trying to watch what was going on over there.
Yeah.
Actually, I like the comments that you're talking about because the Declaration of Independence, our liberties are built upon a quote decent respect for the opinions of mankind, right? And so I think that that's really what we're getting away from is that we're again I agree with you
Sure.
wholeheartedly.
Sure.
We're not respecting each other, but I also think that because of the fact that the money has devalued to the extent where we no longer have the choice, and I think, Laura, you mentioned this, right? That we would like the choice to go to work or
Right.
to stay home, right? And I think that's accurate. And we no longer have these choices. Our liberty has been infringed upon because the money has been devalued because we don't own the money, right? So that's really the key. We need to get back to owning the money.
Well,
The
before
only
you-
way to do that is to turn it into a credit union.
But before we go back into the credit union conversation, there are a couple topics that kind of came into play about, shoot, now you got me thinking about credit unions. What were you just
That's good. We want everyone at home thinking about credit unions. It's better than a bank because when you're a credit
Okay,
union member,
okay.
you have a share in the ownership. When you have a bank, you have no say whatsoever.
But the concepts that we've been talking about in a variety of, today's episode and others and whatnot is, we have religion that's had to take a muted or backseat position. We have, the concept, the first topic we talked about were, demasculization and things like that. To me, I will say, say that in my, I'm divorced, and in my first marriage, my biggest downfall that I brought to things was that I had no concept of what it really meant to respect my husband, my ex-husband. I had no idea. And I'm gonna, honestly, I'd like to say I'll just blame my parents. Well, my parents are divorced too, but I'm gonna blame the concept that I didn't have that Christian background and upbringing, because once I started connecting with understanding the ideals, and it wasn't just like what we're taught as far as, I'll say the right extreme about submission to your husband and that kind of thing, in that kind of, mode about allowance and things like that, but rather just in general how men and women are naturally different in ways, to be able to see that certain ways are perceived as disrespectful or not, that we as women view things in a totally different way, and so for the most part, and so just to be able to speak each other's language to that degree, so that we can understand each other, have less misunderstandings, be able to understand there's not a right way and a wrong way. Like I think what your point on that last topic was, it's more of like you have to view it from the feminine perspective, otherwise you're wrong and you're overly aggressive. It's a balancing of that to see that there's a male perspective.
Just to clarify, when you say Christian perspective, you're referring to the golden rule, right? Like treat everyone as you want to be treated. Is it essentially?
No, I'm getting more to, have you ever heard of the book Love and Respect? So it just goes to the basic concepts that, God has commanded us as wives to respect our husbands, and husbands are supposed to love their wives, because men need that element of respect a little bit more, whereas, and they speak in that's their currency, right, if you will, yeah. Whereas women need a little bit more of that love side of it, right, and the adoration and things like that. And so not that you don't need love, and not that we don't need respect, but be able to understand from a little bit.
Yeah, I'm shaking my head too.
Yeah,
I'd like to hear what
fantasy.
you have to say on this.
I think, there's so many things involved with what you're saying. I wonder, okay, so if there are Americans, we're talking about the American family, what if they're not coming from any sort of religious background? They cannot have a good marriage?
Right.
I didn't say
separation
that.
of church and state.
But it sounds like that's the way to get back to a good interaction between men and women, is to understand, God's plan. Well, what if that isn't a part of their ideology whatsoever?
I don't think she was saying that, God's plan. Were you?
That'd be a whole other conversation, I think. I'm getting to the main differences between men and women.
And where do those come from?
Well, that does come from God. Our whole country was founded on God.
Well, okay.
Our designer designed it. That's the premise, because that's I agree with you, because it's like our designer designed us that way. I don't want to get off into intelligent design, but
right.
we were designed
we don't want that.
We were designed a particular way, and even if you forget for the fact, because I'm a Christian as well, forget my Christian perspective. If you look throughout world history, we see these gender roles reflected in history. And again, as I said, the gender roles are not a prison; it's a framework. You know what I'm saying? It's
like it changes, though.
Yeah, it can, but I feel like
change according to culture.
Yeah, it changes, but again, who's okay? And I guess this could go both ways. You have culture wars, quote unquote. So we have a particular perspective. You have a separate perspective. So we both try to advocate for our cultural perspective, and that's just simply what's happening. And now I respect that you have a different perspective, and so. I
think the balancing, though, I guess that was my point, is just in order to get back to communication and in order to make sure that things are working, it's, to me, I had no idea, I just wasn't speaking his male language of the importance of having that underlying sense of respect, that even if there's a disagreement or whatever, that men in general need that having to feel like they're respected, whereas we as women, I want to be respected. My husband and I have had many conversations about that, but our underlying most basic need premises more on the need to feel loved and cared for. And so, not that somebody has to care for me, trust me, I'm a totally independent woman, and it creates problems in our marriage as well, but just those are the two, when you boil it down to the two most basic things, it's just a thing that is very distinct and different between us. Not that one's right and one's wrong, and that's where I think that the first topic we talked about kind of makes that shift to being, the male way of looking at things is wrong, it's just too aggressive, or it's not emotional enough, or something of that nature. I guess that's all my point was.
Go ahead, Judy.
I think, and I spoke to you about this, I think that you're saying that you want a man who will stand beside you and help make decisions together with you on an equal basis, but you want one to stand behind you when you need support.
And vice versa. I think men want that too.
Stand beside you.
I personally want that, but I was just speaking to my own feelings in my own first marriage of not really understanding what what a man in general needed. And in my marriage, there were things that I was doing that were disrespectful. I just didn't understand from a male perspective. That's all I'm saying.
All right. Yeah,
So
I agree with you.
Just to kind of wrap up this segment,
Sure.
then, it sounds like that we have one thing that we can at least agree on, that we all want to be loved and respected, right? And whether you attribute that to Jesus or Muhammad or somebody else, those are common tenets across the religions, right? And that comes down to liberty, right? So having the ability to do what we want to do so that we can love and respect ourselves and each other without being, dealing with overt amount of stress. And I think, now, I hope that you would agree at this point, right? If our objective is to live freely and without fear and to reduce stress so that we can support the family, then we want to address the underlying causes to those issues.
Which is money.
Which is a credit union.
There we go.
I think both are true. That's the
being
thing.
an American.
Okay.
Being an American
Yeah.
that knows that they've got those liberties, that knows that they've got the right to.
And demanding that from our government.
Okay.
Demanding that freedom to be able to make those choices.
Absolutely.
All right.
Which we don't have as long as the Federal Reserve owns the bank.
All right, so we have to move on to our next topic. So who's introducing that?
Is that the election integrity? Are we going back to
is.
election integrity? All right.
Yes.
So if we have, all right. So we spoke about this briefly before, but we didn't get into voting rights in particular. We didn't get into the idea of registration for voting, and the fact that actually a very Republican state in North Dakota doesn't require registration at all. And I would argue that that's the right approach to things, because the very act of registering to vote can be used as a disenfranchisement tool for Americans, right? And then we also have a poll tax that we can talk about. So there are a lot of different topics here.
I hear a teeing up of some kind that is coming my way. Do you want to just get to that with the poll tax one?
Why don't you lead off with the poll tax?
Well, I guess I'll say that I was started to get the inquisition about the whole concept of the poll tax. Basically, you were tying it to things like how felons, for example, can't vote unless they have all their fines paid off and things
Right.
like that. So, and I want to say you had maybe even talked
And
about
it's a
that or alluded to
state-by-state
that.
basis right now. So
And there's some controversy because I want to say it's, was it Giuliani or somebody that was
Michael
paying?
Bloomberg.
Okay, Bloomberg was paying the fines of those in Florida, the felons in Florida, so that they could be able to vote. And I want to say, was it Trump himself? Somebody was calling for an investigation into that. And to me, unless I'm missing something here, to me, I'm thinking, okay, so is this not a free society where, first of all, beside the main point that you're getting to, if Bloomberg has the money, and he wants to spend it in that way to pay off somebody's fines, I'm not sure how that's criminal or there's
it's
anything
not
wrong with
criminal.
that
It's
at all.
You have free will to do that.
And so if somebody doesn't want to accept that, if they want to have to earn that themselves or whatever, they think they put themselves in that position, okay, I could see that. But to me, though, the whole concept, which I think you were kind of getting to on that regard, of having felons that are not able to vote unless they pay fines, or the felons can't vote at all in certain situations. To me, I don't think that would be a disenfranchisement that's not acceptable.
But my question is, well, Bloomberg, why is he paying them? Is he just doing out the goodness of his heart? I think that's that's
It's
the
irrelevant.
I think that's
The issue at hand is
wait a
law.
minute. Let me finish. I think there is a question to it. Is he doing it to incentivize him to do something in return? I think that's a fair question.
To me, though, incentivizing is not the same as blackmail, and
Right.
his intent is irrelevant. I disagree with him doing it, but I think intent is irrelevant. It's still a free
from a
country.
conservative perspective, if you're really concerned about Mayor Bloomberg paying for someone's fines so they can vote, then you may want to change the law to allow people to vote without having to
Have
rely on
fines
someone to
paid.
pay off
I'm not making the case that it's
fines.
wrong. I'm just asking I'm just positing the question. I'm just positing
Okay.
the question that
All right.
why is he doing it? But with that being said, we are going to move on.
No, I kind of wanted to hear his one last thought. He had the Constitution out. That's got to be good.
The 24th Amendment is very clear, and it says the right of citizens of the United States to vote in any primary or any other election for president or vice president, for electors for president or vice president, or for senator, representative in Congress, shall not be denied or abridged by the United States for any reason of failure to pay any poll or any other tax. It's very clear. And so in the case where people are being denied the right to vote because they either have to register or because they have to pay fines, the Constitution is clear. And from my vantage point, I think the one thing that we routinely come back to, regardless of the topic, is that we are not adhering to the basics of our Constitution. And if once we get back to just doing the right thing according to the Constitution and setting everything else aside, everything else becomes a lot easier, not only from a social fabric standpoint, but from a family standpoint, from an individual standpoint, life in general. We can
Oh my gosh, we agree on something, Joe. This is fabulous.
What's that?
All right, folks, so we're going to move on to our next segment, QWERTY quips. Few combinations are more poisonous than race in politics. That combination has torn whole nations apart and led to the slaughter of millions in countries around the world. And so I picked this because we kind of touched on in our last segment about a colorless society. I feel like race is being weaponized in a way to get people to vote or support policies that are very detrimental. A book I highly recommend is Color, Communism, and Common Sense by a guy, Manning Johnson, the name just left me, written in 1958, and talking about how communists, or what we sometimes call Marxists, were infiltrating America in order to instigate race conflict in order to create a Marxist revolution in America. And if we see groups like, again, not the phrase, but the organization Black Lives Matter, they are a Marxist organization. And oftentimes at their rallies, when they claim that they're fighting against racism or police brutality, they somehow inject capitalism into the conversation. Well, this has been going on for years. And Manning Johnson wrote the book in 1958, warning us of what the communists were up to, and nobody listened. And that was 60 years ago. So, what do you guys think?
I think it's
Well, we know there's a guy who always has the financial perspective on everything, so.
I want to defer to Laura on this one.
I'm gobsmacked. You know, the idea that people have caused conflict, racial conflict, in order to promote themselves politically is just so ludicrous. It's a foundation of our country. That conflict and that sin of slavery is at the very foundation of our country. No one brought it here and opened it up and said, "Oh, guess what? We're gonna make this really juicy." And no, it's always been there.
Well, I'm not saying anybody brought it here. Maybe I need to clarify. It's one thing to exacerbate something. And so he talked about in his book, and he had the evidence because he was discussing a lot of the economic disparities we see in the Black community. So he gave an example of like a Harlem hospital. So it was a particular segregated hospital in Harlem, and a group of wealthy Black men decided to pool their resources and build a new hospital because the other one funded by the government was subpar. Well, the communist shills that were pretending that they cared so much about Black people, they were like, "Oh no, don't do that because it's going to encourage segregation." And they were like, "Well, no, we're just going to build a more sufficient hospital to service the people." And they discouraged it, and the hospital didn't happen. The same happened with builders and businessmen. And he proved his case because in 1928, Stalin saw, because the way Marxism works or communism works is that the nation doesn't invade another nation. They basically rise up a guerrilla group within the nation to overthrow the government.
Right.
And Stalin saw that in America, trying to push class warfare would not instigate conflict. What would instigate conflict is racism, because it was a real problem. And so even in the book, he talked about the conversation that was made. The reason why you guys are in this position is because of capitalism. Just think of the 1619 Project. A lot of people don't want to talk about a component of that project was that capitalism in America came from a slave economy. Capitalism is a natural human economic system. If I sell you something, you're going to keep it. So to blame capitalism for all the ills, they're blaming capitalism for things that are totally irrelevant.
Who's blaming capitalism?
Marxists.
Who are these Marxists?
Who are they?
Again, Black Lives Matter, the organization.
How is
Black Lives Matter, the
nature?
organization, their founders said we are trained Marxists.
All right,
What is Marxism?
We have a guest on this show. I want to know what his thoughts are on this. What do you think about this? First off, would you introduce yourself to the camera and then
My name's Brian Pannebecker. I'm an auto worker at Ford Motor Company, and I founded the group Auto Workers for Trump 2020. I also served as spokesman in 2006 for a group called the Michigan Civil Rights Initiative with Jennifer Gratz and Ward Connerly. So in terms of the racial issue, I was a spokesman for a group that was trying to eliminate that some of those classifications. We were moving in the opposite direction then, trying to declassify people in terms of their race and just create a meritocracy where people were judged by their ability and their merit and their accomplishments. So it seems like we've come 180 degrees since then, and now we're moving into identity politics. So some of the topics you're talking about are very interesting, and I think we're really in a bad place right now. So hopefully we can defeat the Marxists behind Black Lives Matter, while at the same time addressing some of the issues that the good people in that organization who are being used are trying to address, like police reform and so on.
So Brian, it's Brian, right?
Yes.
And do you agree then that the Constitution should be applied evenly to all people?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. So that I think is really, I think that like most of these movements, it's been hijacked. The conversation's been hijacked. The narrative's been hijacked. Right?
Sure.
Everything's been hijacked. And Christina, to your point, and then I want to just defer on this, and I'd probably sit back and listen for the rest of this one because we have more to cover. But as far as everyone's talking about the Marxists are invading and everything else, they're not invading. We've been invaded. It's over. It's done. It happened in 1913, right? The best general wins without firing a shot. They don't come in here with guns. They come in here with weapons or with money. They buy the country. And that's what's going on. And then they use that to divide and conquer everything.
But that's kind of to my point. That's my point. It wasn't a war. I'm talking about it's an ideological thing that you poison the well. So you say to these people, you know why you're experiencing racial discrimination? It's because of capitalism.
Well,
which
okay.
is ridiculous.
Again, I think
it's the
that
human
narrative's
heart.
been hijacked. I think that I'm glad to hear Brian
But
say.
I think what she's talking about is the Black Lives Matter organization. The three women that founded it actually have those philosophies on there that they're actually talking about not just Black
But
Lives
there's
Matter.
three women who put up a website.
No, they're
it's
not three women who
It's
put up on a
money behind
website.
them,
They
and they're
actually
the face of the
started.
movement.
They started that entire
I don't
movement.
think
Now,
they
I
started
don't
the
agree that
movement.
they speak on behalf of every single person who's trying to get racial equality, but that is the racial equality organization that receives the most media attention and has the most, understanding. If you say that on the street, everybody's going to know what that is, right? And so for those three women and their website that they founded and the movement that they're trying to do, it's not even just about racial equality. They actually attack, as we've talked about, I don't know if it was this episode or other episodes where we were talking about attacking the foundation of the family. They literally say in there that they're attacking the whole system.
And is that not evidence that the narrative's been hijacked?
No,
What do you
it's
mean?
not
That's
the narrative.
their-
It hasn't hijacked. It's on their website.
It's
Yeah,
their
but who
own.
are these people?
That's
the
what we're telling you.
self-proclaimed
That's what
Marxists.
they say.
Well,
If
that's-
they say they're
that's
Marxists,
the-
why should
that's-
I believe them? If they say they're a Marxist, I'm like, oh no,
Because
they're
the
not
Marxists-
really
They're
but it's
three
based on-
Americans. They're three Americans.
But it's the ma-
Okay, but they're Marxists and they can be Marxists, but
It
I'm gonna
doesn't
call them
matter,
out.
just because-
It's the battlefield of ideology. They can push their Marxism. I'm not gonna
You're
refute the
giving
Marxism.
them way too much credit.
No, I'm
yes,
not.
you are.
No, I'm
Brian's position is the correct position. Everyone deserves to have a constitution applied evenly to all people.
I'm
We can
not
all
negating
agree
that.
on that.
I'm not negating
But we
that.
also have a system that doesn't respect everybody's rights. I think we need to move on to the next topic at this point.
Okay, so the second
Judy, we wanna hear
party
from you.
quote. Go ahead.
Oh,
Quip. Sorry.
Here we go.
Controversial.
All right. All right, this is coming from NPR and kind of related to a discussion we had earlier about gender. Last month, women left the workforce at 4 times the rate that men did.
And
Why
that's
do you think
timely
that
saying
is?
that last month, like in September?
Yes,
Due to the coronavirus
yes.
and stuff, or what?
What?
Do we know the underlying cause of that? Is it the coronavirus?
Yes. So, this article is highlighting. Let me get back to it. With the new school year underway, women are bearing the brunt of childcare and housework in addition to their jobs during the pandemic. Enough already, multiple demands causing women to basically lose their minds. So,
It's true. Because I think I mentioned on one episode before, I was talking to somebody who said his wife is like having anxiety and depression, and she's like, he feels like she's
Yeah.
gonna snap. Like she's living.
Well,
about
even the
break.
teachers, I'll say, that, having come from a perspective where I'm not a teacher, I'm a homeschool teacher, but I worked in the public school setting with teachers, and how we start off having those Zoom meetings and things like that when schools were shut down initially in March and April and May. And even to see the teachers feel like, well, I teach children all day long, but I have to teach my own children. Like, this is a whole nother realm that I'm not
probably has something
prepared
to do with
for.
it, I would imagine.
So, and these are not, these are women, it was all women in that particular school at that time, but, they're all women I love and respect. And I'm not saying this because there's anything wrong with these women, but they do a phenomenal job about teaching, 27 students all day long, but then they have 1, 2, 3, 4 kids of their own. And to be able to have to, teach at different levels or different grades or different, there's something to that.
It's emotionally different. Well, you were
It
talking
is.
about how it's emotionally different, how you approach teaching other people's children versus teaching your own
because
children.
I'm homeschooling my kids, so trying to juggle that, it's a way different thing because they're your own children, so your expectations are different. How you interact with them is totally different, because when you're interacting with another person's child, it's just different. It's a different relationship. The dynamics are different.
Why are you homeschooling your kids?
I do not like the virtual schooling. I think it's terrible. My youngest daughter could not learn under the virtual, and also I feel like, number one, I feel it's socially unhealthy for them, and I also feel like it was more of a burden, because I have to keep track of every teacher's lesson, every teacher's syllabus, making sure everybody's on. I have 2 daughters. Everybody's on target at the right time, so I'm still managing them. So I might as well do it myself. And also, I felt the education is subpar. I feel like what I can provide at home is a lot better because it's tailored to them. And I feel like we actually accelerate at a faster rate. I can tell their vocabulary is improving. What they're writing. I can teach them economics. I can
You can
teach
meet
them
their
all
own
kinds of
individual
stuff.
needs.
Exactly.
And they don't have to wear a mask.
And I can teach them theology too.
But they don't have the social interaction with other kids.
See, that is the biggest load of crap argument that I have
think so?
heard. I have, on and off, for, the last 7 years homeschooled, elementary, middle school, high school. And I could tell you that, and as far as my kids go, all 4 of my kids play soccer.
Well,
3 of my kids
that's your
play
social.
volleyball. We're heavily involved in our church, in our neighborhood. I mean, our cul-de-sac has 12 houses where there's like 23 kids within, an 8-year span. So my child, in particular, my youngest, who's 6, gets at least the exact same amount of socialization that she would in any other scenario if she was at school. But quite frankly, let's think about it. If she was at school right now, what would that be? Behind the desk at Zoom, on the other side of a computer, because that, since March, was what she was, reduced to as far as her public education went.
And then too,
so,
the benefit of homeschooling, we can do like activities. Like I told class Monday through Thursday. Friday is the day we go to a museum, we go to the zoo, we do it.
Plus there's
field
co-ops.
learning. Yep, it's field learning,
Yep.
and you can interact with other parents, and then you have church, you have other things to mediate or to help them interact with other people.
When I'm lucky enough,
I find ways.
When I live in Hudsonville, and I'm very close to, maybe 20 minutes from the homeschool building, which is, anybody in the greater Grand Rapids area knows that the homeschool building is just a phenomenal resource. So it's in a physical building that you can go to. They have co-ops that are based out of there. There's homeschooling supply store, things like that. They have the ability to connect with other homeschool associations where they're doing the competitive sports, and they're doing band and orchestra and choir, anything that you have in a public school setting, but it's in a much more, it's still structured, but it's a way that's a lot more flexible, because you can pick around your work schedules or things like that.
You ladies are not the norm.
Well, but on
They're
our
all
side
not
of the state,
average.
and I will say on my side of the state, that most people, and I've lived in this tiny little town of Belding, Michigan, 5,000 people, and now I live in Hudsonville, which is very close to Grand Rapids, so it's a much bigger area. All of the above. I always knew about the homeschool building. I always knew about the resources there, and even when I lived an hour away from there in a tiny little town, we all knew about it. All the people that were homeschooling knew about it and availed themselves of different resources like that, as well as
You
others.
have an organization of homeschoolers that you
I don't.
parents no.
No, just people that I know
Some
in the
of them do.
communities.
Some of them
Some
and
do,
that's
but I've
really-
never.
That's really supportive to homeschooling.
Right.
Yeah, no, I just have curriculum. It's a company called Veritas Press. Buy curriculum from them, so I don't have to do a lot of thinking about that part. But we're moving on to the third Quarty Quip. Joe.
All right.
Is it about a
so-
credit union?
Not this time. Not this time. But if you want to talk about the credit union, you will have an opportunity to do so.
Okay.
All right. So again, Joe McHugh, running for President of the United States. LibertyStrikesBack.com is the website. And I am representing the American perspective. And the tweet is, liberty is clean air, fresh water, healthy organic food, money that retains value over time, and a constitution that is applied evenly to all people at all times, by default and without exception. Now, with that in mind, I would like to hear your perspective about what you feel liberty is. How would you define liberty? And if we may, I'd like to put a little bit of order to this and go from right to left. So starting with Judy.
Okay, I believe everything you said is what we should be able to have here in America. But that's kind of an ideal. I think reality comes into it, and sometimes there's difficulties.
Can you repeat the
in some
first
of
four
those.
things, though?
Liberty is clean air, fresh water, healthy organic food, money that retains value over time, and a constitution that is applied evenly to all people at all times, by default and without exception.
It's the ideal.
Yeah.
And it's something we should be shooting for.
Yeah, exactly.
And if
yes.
we can do it, then we should have
It's
it.
like, I always shot to be a perfect parent.
Oh, right.
I wasn't.
Fair enough.
So I tried.
You weren't?
Yeah, you weren't? What?
I am.
For the last name of Miracle, we would think that you would be
I tried.
a perfect
I
parent.
pretended.
What are your
Brian, what do you
thoughts?
think?
Well, I just believe that we should have the least amount of government intrusion into our lives that we possibly can. I'm a conservative. I wouldn't call myself a libertarian in the sense that I'm more of a fiscal libertarian than I am. But socially, I just believe that we should have as much freedom as we possibly can without infringing upon other people's rights. And government should stay out of our lives to the greatest extent that possible.
Do you mind going like this for a second?
So living in Michigan right now, it's tough because we have a governor who seems to think she's a queen, and even when the Supreme Court rules against her and says she doesn't have the authority to tell us what to do, what aisles we can walk down in grocery stores, and a list of things that seem to be very arbitrary, she still doesn't want to give up her grip on power. She says she's going to hang on to it as long as she can, and there's other avenues she can use to tell us what to do. So the American voters, especially here in Michigan, need to step up and elect officials that are going to allow us to have our liberties and freedoms returned to us after this virus passes.
And would you feel that the Constitution is the best barometer, the best arbiter, the best measure for liberty?
Well, sure.
Okay.
You know, it shouldn't be used against us. It's just a broad framework. Government seems to be usurping and trying to take on authority that it doesn't have, and we need to move away from that and back to our roots, which is liberty and freedom for the American people.
I agree with you on that.
So I would say I agree with all of that, and that's why the first three things that you said are no-go. Now, I would love clean
fresh
air
water, healthy food are
all.
no-go.
I would love all that, but what that sets up it's teeing up the government to be able to control what we eat or how we eat it, or how things are being affected in the environment. And I'll tell you what, that's not in the Constitution. And so I agree that the other half of your statement there, spot on. And our whole concept of liberty is the basis that our whole government is instituted to secure our blessings of liberty. Mm-hmm. And so to the extent that the government goes outside of that purpose, it's malfunctioning. It's not supposed to do that. And we as people have rights that we don't have to prove. We innately have them. God gave them to us. And we have these rights. All people have these rights. And so government's job is to secure those rights. And so if government is trying to do something to us or to infringe upon those rights, they have to have a very good reason. They have to be given specific authority in the Constitution to do so. And we're seeing that all kinds of government agents, specifically here in the state of Michigan, we have a governor that completely doesn't know how to read the Constitution, let alone follow it. But the concepts that you're talking about, that's like saying what she's saying. Governor Whitmer here and a lot of these other governors across the United States have been saying, well, this is based on the premise of public safety or public health or public welfare, and that's tied to those notions of clean air and clean water and clean this and again, I'm not arguing against having clean air and clean water and all that other fun stuff. I love being at the beach, don't get me wrong. But to the extent that the government is going to use that as the way to control us and regulate us as the people, it's a no-go for me.
Okay, so I appreciate you saying that, and I want to pose another follow-up question to it. Right, so I can see how there would be concern of government regulation creep. We've seen that, right? There's evidence all over the place of that. What if we, after thorough investigation, we found that our central bank, and again, I always bring it back to the central bank, But the central bank does fund oil wars and drug wars, right? And they do fund plastics and things like that. Now, there's a study done by not only the EPA, but also the EPA state level equivalent, pretty much everywhere in America and around the world, that PFAS, which is a carcinogenic chemical, toxic chemical, is in most drinking water. So we have plastic and microplastics in our body, and we have chemicals in our body. Now, do you feel like that our central bank should be sponsoring and favoring companies that make us sick? Or do you think that our money should be supporting something that helps to facilitate our health and wealth?
Our government funds, our government funds should not be supporting anything. Our government funds should be drastically reduced with the amount of taxes that are taken from us, and the functions that government serves are far too great. We're doing 95% more than what we should be doing. So our government should not be sponsoring or supporting anything. What they need to do is get out of the way of the private organizations that are there from the beginning to be able to do these things. Instead, they overtax them and they overregulate them, and they do all these things to bring them down. So you're not allowed to help this group of people, and you're not allowed to help this group of people. But wait, because nobody's helping them, we as the government need to come in and take care of you, and then we need to fund it, and then we need to tax you more. Well, no, the whole system is broken that way. We need to rip all that away, get rid of all that, tax the least amount possible to get the job done, which is to secure our blessings of liberty, period.
Okay, yes, and yes, absolutely yes on that. I want to make a point for the people at home that are listening, as well as for everybody here, that there are two sides of policy. There's fiscal policy, which is what you just described, because you said taxes, and I completely agree with you, right? The other side of it is monetary policy. And when you have a credit union instead of a bank, it generates revenue for the people, which we're currently not getting. That revenue is being extracted from us and our economy and concentrated into the hands of the wealthy, and they're funding air that's dirty, water that is full of lead and PFAS, and food that makes us fat and sick. And if we had a credit union that was clean, green, citizen-owned, and fully transparent to the American people, then we would be able to ensure that we would be funding things that work for the American people. So we can have both. We actually can have your perspective of low taxes without government overreach, and use the monetary policy to fund
We shouldn't be funding anything.
Green America that's healthy.
We shouldn't be funding anything.
So, I mean, this is a question that popped into my head when you were talking about, limiting government. What is your idea about like the EPA? Because he mentioned the
should not
EPA.
exist.
We want to talk about the definitions of liberty. So I want to hear what your definition of liberty is before we.
All right.
How would you define liberty? Because the segment's not about the EPA, it's about liberty, right? So let's focus on that. So how would you define liberty?
I guess the ability to make decisions about my life and decisions for my family that keep me safe and respect my neighbors, my community, my nation, my world.
Okay. That's excellent. I agree with that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any comments on that?
I agree with that.
Yeah, we're all in agreement.
Screw the world. I disagree.
So you're basically saying liberty is the ability to live freely and without fear.
Right, but then within the boundaries of
Without harming your neighbor.
right, with respecting people. I mean, if I,
Exercising your rights in a way that doesn't take away your neighbor's rights.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So just to recap, just so you know, Thomas Jefferson described.
Well, hold on.
liberty-
I'm sorry to say this, but I think we have about 60 seconds. So in about 20 seconds, what do you got for us?
Yeah.
Liberty is the government leaving me alone and allowing me to pursue my life. That's the way I would sum up the whole thing, and not compelling me to do anything I don't want to do, as long as it doesn't involve, as you mentioned, me harming my neighbor.
And Christina, my parting word would be the government that governs least governs best.
There you go.
Yeah.
William Henry Harrison said that. And so Thomas Jefferson, just to summarize, I believe what everyone here said, and I think we're all in agreement, Thomas Jefferson described rightful liberty as unobstructed action, within limits drawn around us by the equal rights of others. And he continues, he says, I do not add within the limits of the law, because the law is often the tyrant's will, and always so when it violates the rights of the individual.
So thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Fifth Seat with our special guest here that we had from a different perspective, and we hope that you'll tune in next time to hear even more interesting topics.